and welcome to Sunshine for Your Life. Today I'm going to start talking a little bit about China. China is going to be a big player in the second coming of Jesus. And it's a kind of an interesting story about China because I remember when I was growing up and we had geography classes and all of that, because that was many moons ago, nobody knew anything about China. China was like a big unknown. It was isolated. They were not getting involved in other nations' affairs. They weren't on the world scene. They were huge. In fact, people talk about it. How do we miss China? We can't miss China. It occupies so much territory. I'm going to put up a map now about China. I've used this map before, and we've talked about Russia. And Russia is all of this gold area, which I put in heavy red right here. But China is this bright yellow, and in between is Mongolia. And of course, there's always been arguments as to who does Mongolia belong to. Does it belong to Russia? Does it belong to China? Well, it's kind of by itself just sitting there. Russia's here and China's here. So China is a very big nation. Nobody knew anything about China. In fact, when we were growing up, we said nobody knows anything about China. It is a closed country. And as a closed country, we don't know what's going on in its internal affairs. We don't know anything really about China. And so, that's just the way it was. But there was a push on that people wanted to have, nations wanted to have China open. And I think basically it was for trade purposes. But remember also Russia had become communistic, and Russia wanted to push communism and have world dominion with communism. And so therefore they wanted to push into China for communistic, to increase communism. And so therefore Russia was sitting there, and what the United States did, we started sending people to China, basically for events like ping pong, table tennis, the kinds of things that the Chinese were interested in playing for games, and there were contests and people won and all of that. And through sports, basically, China is gradually open. Now, if you watch the Olympics, the Chinese have wonderful skaters, they have wonderful gymnasts, and they really are in the sports world on the scene. So then they became interested in world affairs, and they became interested in having world dominion too. So China became communistic, and for a while, for quite a few years, was allied with Russia, because Russia was also communistic. And then they separated. China kind of left Russia and abandoned Russia and went on its own. So then they weren't allies anymore, but they were both communistic countries. No freedom allowed. And there still is no freedom allowed. It's kind of interesting in a way, because I have talked with a person who comes to my house repeatedly and does some medical care with me. And she said she has a sister living in China. And when the pandemic broke, they were required to wear masks. They had to wear masks. They did not have a choice. It wasn't you can do it if you want to. Oh, let's get back to normal. Everybody wore a mask when they were outside. And if you were seen outside without a mask, you could be arrested, and you would be arrested. But as a result of that, I'm not saying this is good or bad or indifferent. I'm not putting a personal spin on it in any way. But as a result of that, my friend told me, almost nobody has COVID. It just doesn't exist. Everybody had masks. Everybody had social distancing. Everybody was always covered. And it cut down on the illness so much that she said almost nobody has the illness. There wasn't, and then you see China, and they're not wearing masks because they don't have it anymore, because they got rid of it, because nobody could catch it, because everybody was wearing masks. So the masks were very, very effective. So, because it does come at a point where you don't have the personal freedom to decide for yourself what you want. China's not a place where you have any personal freedom. It was communistic. It has its own brand of communism. They split from Russia. They went on their own, and as a result of that, they became a nation that is just obsessed with world dominion, just like Russia is. They want the same thing as Russia wants. Now, there will be a political power that's going to rise up in Europe, and it's going to be called a 10-nation confederacy. There will be 10 nations involved. It'll be kind of loosely based on the European Common Market. Some of the European Common Market will be part of the 10-nation confederacy. The United States will not be involved, probably. The United States will gradually lose power because the United States, I think part of it is for moral reasons, that because we're engaged in so many things as a nation that aren't Christian, that aren't good. So they are united. Now, the 10-nation confederacy will be led by the Antichrist. It is very likely, although I can't say for certain, that the Antichrist comes out of one of the 10 nations, because the Bible talks about it symbolically, a being with horns, and 2 horns come up and swallow other horns, and all of that kind of thing. So at any rate, we have the Antichrist, and he will at first appear to be engaged in world peace. He wants world peace, but at the same time, that stops, and then they start to want world dominion, just like Russia wants it. So Daniel, the book of Daniel, has a vision, and the vision is of a bear, a leopard, and it talks about the nations that are rising. Now, in order to kind of make this simpler, there are 4 basic nations in society historically, and the first was Babylon, and the second was Persia, and the third was Greece, and the fourth was Rome. Now, all of these kinds of societies, civilizations, failed at some point. Rome was the fourth, so Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Rome was the last one. People do tend to feel at this time that that Rome is rebuilding itself, and Rome will be the last civilization. So we are now living in an age where Rome is reestablishing itself, and that Rome will be the final civilization. Those 4, Rome was the last, and then Rome comes back and redevelops itself. And as history proceeds and nations stand against each other, all of them will want Israel deserted, they will want Israel defeated, and they will want total world dominion. And so Rome establishes itself, and it'll be like the headquarters of that 10-nation confederacy. Now, in the end, there is going to be 3 or 4 kinds of civilizations, 3 or 4 federations, and they're all going to be fighting against each other, and they're all going to be fighting against Israel, and it's going to lead us right up to the war in Armageddon, which is the final war. Now, there will be these confederations. There's a Northern Confederacy that's going to be composed of what's left of Russia, or Russia that's trying to redevelop itself, and Iran, Iraq, and so forth. So that's one. There's going to be the Asiatic Confederacy, which is going to be called the Kings of the East, and that's basically China, probably Japan, China and her allies. You have the Arab Confederacy. Those they're called in the Bible the Kings of the South, which is another group of Arabic nations. And then you have the 10-nation confederacy, if that's involved. Now, the 10-nation confederacy, the Antichrist leading the 10-nation confederacy, they are going to want to fight against all the other confederacy. What do they want anyway? There's a separate thing. There's a several things that they want. One, they want Israel destroyed. They're not happy that Israel is a nation. Israel has been a nation since 1948, when it came together and declared itself to be a nation. Now, so they don't want Israel to be a nation. They don't want Israel or the Jewish people to exist. Now, remember in World War II how the Jews were slaughtered. So many of them were slaughtered. It was an attempt to get rid of Jewish people. Why are Jews so hated? They shouldn't be. They are freedom-loving people. They're a God-loving people. Why would they be hated? Well, they are God's chosen people. And as a result of that, if you have societies that don't want God, they don't want the Jewish nation either, and they don't want the Christians, because Christians of all people should be supporting the Jewish nation. You stop to think of it. I know some people who claim to be Christian and they're anti-Semitic, but they need to remember Jesus was Jewish. Jesus came out of the Jewish culture. He was a Jew. And he worshiped in temples, and he taught in temples. The Bible is full in the New Testament of Jesus talking to the people and doing it in the temple. Now, one of the temples that no longer exists is in Capernaum, but there are certain parts of it that exist. The stone structures parts exist, and we on our trips to Israel always went there. It's in Caesarea. He went there regularly, and he taught the people, and the people were amazed. These are Jewish people. They're amazed because he didn't talk like one of the scribes. He talked like he had the truth. He knew what was happening. He knew what was going on. And he used normal things to help to communicate with people. He talked about lambs and about shepherds and about fishing, things that people would be very familiar with. And I know there are some people who feel that they read the English King James Bible and they feel that the King James Bible is the original Bible. Well, it's a wonderful Bible, and we grew up with it, and I read it still. But it's not the original Bible. Jesus didn't speak English. He didn't speak French or Italian or Greek either. Jesus spoke Aramaic. Aramaic is a form of Hebrew. There's an old Hebrew language, there's a new Hebrew language. He spoke Aramaic. That's what the people spoke in his day. So to get to the original, you need to get to the Bible that was produced in Israel with the Hebrew language. And then, of course, from there, you have Bibles translated into various languages. The Geneva Bible is one of the first translated into English. Then after that, the King James comes. You see, so there's lots of Bible translations. A translation is when you go back to the original language, and you study the original languages, and then you translate the scriptures into what seems right to you into different languages, but you go back to the original Hebrew, you go back to the original Aramaic and make a translation. There are a lot of Bibles, modern Bibles, that are paraphrased. A paraphrased Bible is just you read what's someone else has already written, different versions that already exist, and you create another version from those, but you don't go back to the original and study the original languages, which really needs to be done for a good translation. There are a lot of wonderful translations out there. There are a lot of wonderful paraphrases out there. The paraphrased ones are sometimes easier to read, easier to understand, because they're in our own modern languages in a way, using the phrases that we use today. The King James is a translation. It's a wonderful translation. Some people have trouble with the these and the thous and, the way that the language used to be written. So the value of the modern translations is that you can understand what the modern translations are saying, because the language structure is what you would be using in everyday language for example, the Good News for Modern Man, and like that, the different ones like that. So anyway, these confederacies are going to be Northern Confederacy, Asiatic Confederacy. China is called the Kings of the East in the Bible, and then you have the Arab Confederacies, and then you have possibly the 10-nation confederacy, but they all want Israel wiped out, and they all want to have dominion, world dominion, and they will fight each other, and they will fight against God. All of these nations or confederacies will march on Jerusalem in the end. They will all get together to fight. And what's going to happen is you're going to have the last war, and the last war is going to be the War of Armageddon. And Armageddon is located in a place called Megiddo, which I have right here on this map. And Megiddo is a little below Haifa. It's across from the Jordan River, and yeah, good. That's good. And it's like I have maybe a couple of places where I can show you where it is. Here's another map that I have here. Megiddo is going to be right around here, and Haifa's a little bit above it. It's in a beautiful area of Israel. It's almost toward the northern part, halfway between the northern and the middle part of it. It's right here. I got it right here. Not too far from the Sea of Galilee, kind of in the middle, kind of a little toward the north. This will be, and China is going to boast that it has 22 million, 200 million people. China boasts that it has 200 million soldiers in the army. And as a matter of fact, the Bible talks about that. The Bible talks about 200 million people. The Chinese have 200 million people, and they're going to all go to war. The bloodshed in this war is awful. It's the worst thing ever. It talks about the bloodshed. Russia is going to be using horses in this war. As a matter of fact, Russia is maintaining a lot of horses now, and the Bible talks about Russia using horses. There's going to be so much bloodshed, there's going to be so much destruction, that the Bible actually says that no life would survive unless God himself stops the war. So God himself stops the war, and when he stops the war, that's the end of it. But there's a lot major destruction everywhere. It is the last war. Now I want to put up one more thing here. Jesus comes back at the end of the war. So let me show you something here that I just want to show you. And then this basically, I'm not getting into Revelations today. I'll use one more segment, and then I'll do a review after that. But basically, we're almost at the end of our study now. Okay, so the church was raptured around here, so we think it will be. That's the future, of course, but it's not far in the future. And then you have that 7-year tribulation, and then the War of Armageddon is going to be right here, and then Jesus comes back. He comes back with his saints. Who are his saints? All of the people who were raptured in the rapture of the church. They are his saints. They come back, and he stops the war. This is the end of it, and there will be a judgment, and there will be a 1,000-year millennium. The 1,000-year millennium will be peaceful. Now, there are some things that happen at the end of the millennium. I'm going to get into that a little later, but we're basically almost finished with this study. So the church is raptured here, the tribulation is here, and then Jesus comes back with his saints, and he rules for 1,000 years, and then you have the end of the millennial period, and eternity will effectively begin then. So I'm going to close it here. I think I'll close it here. Just one other look here. History, Old Testament, rapture, tribulation, 1,000-year millennium, and then eternity begins after the millennium is over with. And so after that, we don't have to worry about what's happening next. Eternity begins. It's a very interesting study. I realize it's been complicated. What I'm going to do before I finish this up, I'm going to take one segment and go a little bit into Revelation. I'm not going into it very far because a lot of it is kind of symbolic. And then I'm going to do a general review of this few weeks that I've talked about the second coming. Just going over it so that you can remember the high points, not getting into much detail, but just so you can remember the high points. And I'm doing that so that it'll be easier. Jesus coming is soon. It's not far off. People have predicted it. People have had visions about it, and it's just not very far off. So what we need to do is I want to make it as simple as I can and easy to understand as I can, so you know what's coming and you know what you're looking for and you know what's going to happen. And the timelines may be a little varied. The positions of where we put things may be a little varied because we don't know fully. We don't understand fully where everything intertwines with everything else. But we have a general concept. And the concept, I think, is pretty accurate as to what's going to happen. The sequence may be a little off. There's always room for some kind of an interpretation that's a little different. But you stop to think, this world isn't going to last forever. After we get to the millennium, after we get to eternity, then you see the Bible talks about the new heavens and the new earth and the new Jerusalem coming on the earth. I'll get into those things a little bit, enough so that you have a clearer picture than maybe you have had all along as to what the second coming means, what 666 means, and all of the things that we talked about. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.